Hello! I am so happy to be here. A big thank you to Willamette Writers for making this presentation possible and letting me bring you a message from your literary ancestors who are asking you to guide society into a healthy future. Today we're going to talk about transformative conflict through the power of the first word. Now, that first word might not be one you ever write or speak or even consciously think of, but it is bubbling out of your unconscious. We're going to make an approach to this through a mythopoetic lens that is fundamental to all genres of storytelling. This is called the universal grammar of story. So we're going to have a half-hour presentation, and for those of you in the conference, we'll do an hour of workshop on drafting that particular word to make your story the strongest. Our conversation today covers three areas. First is the unity of opposites that forms the first word. This is not the literal first word as in once upon a time. It is the first word that triggered the story into being, having come from something called the unity of opposites. So first we'll cover the unity of opposites, and then we will learn, secondly, how to harness its atomic power, where the story begins to feel as if it's writing itself. Surely you've had moments where you can't write fast enough to keep up with the thoughts. And thirdly, we'll see how it quite naturally drives character transformation through the story arc. What is not covered here today is how the unity of opposites transforms the writer in the telling of the story, and how it transforms the audience in the hearing of it. But stay tuned, that's a future very fascinating conversation. Before we dive into the unity of opposites and the power of the first word, let's take a look at our approach through the mythopoetic lens using the universal grammar of story. Now, this is a massive body of knowledge handed down to us across thousands of years from our literary ancestors. But today we're going to look at just one small part of it, so don't worry. A mythopoetic approach to storytelling draws from the archetypes of the collective unconscious, coming out of ancient philosophies and the depth psychology of Carl Jung. The universal grammar of story part of that is a method in philosophy of writing that I developed at Portland State University in the early 1990s. I used a scientific analysis of thousands of stories, books, and scrolls, along with interviews of people from non-literate societies. I interpreted my findings through a mythological lens. In other words, what we have here is a love child of a menage a trois of science, art, and mythology, baptized in a bit of mysticism. Once I found patterns in all that data and formed it into a theory, I had to test it. That began with having it peer-reviewed and revised as the normal process in scientific inquiry and academia. But I needed some real-world practical testing, so I began teaching it at universities, at writing groups large and small, and at conferences across America. Then I needed to get out of my comfort zone, from my most familiar culture. So I took it abroad. I taught it in Europe at the Viadrina in Frankfurt Oder and to students at the Arc Film School in Berlin. This was not so far out of my comfort zone as I have family there, but the next stop was wildly out of my world. I took it to Kyrgyzstan. If you don't know where that is, it's south of Russia, west of China, north of Afghanistan, and east of Iran. That's a picture of my husband and me during Ramadan in the village of Balakche on the shores of Lake Itsikul. I taught it at the American University of Central Asia in the capital of Bishkek, in both the city and the countryside. the universal grammar of story worked beautifully in Kyrgyzstan, especially as it was revised by advice from storytellers there. That prepared me for an even more different place. The Middle East. Yes, that's me. Surely you recognize that glimmer in the one eye you can see. Here I taught it to women in Saudi Arabia at a women's university and then among Bedouin women in the desert wilderness. They were magnificent teachers and storytellers, and they gave me the final polish that I needed to make the universal grammar of story truly universal and finally ready for you. Now that you know where it came from, let me tell you what the universal grammar of story is. It is based on four pillars of knowledge. First is built on the personal and collective unconscious and recognizing the multiple intelligences that writers are quite naturally gifted with at birth and how to advance that. The second pillar looks at language and linguistics, tapping into the power of language to captivate and nourish the souls of those who encounter it. The third pillar looks at the structure of stories with core narrative theories, and the fourth delves into depth psychology, mythology, and mystical philosophy. Today we're going to take a look at one small part of the third pillar of the core narrative theories. So, out of that massive body of knowledge, we're going to distill it down to look at just this one small component of the unity of opposites. I think we've had enough academics, so let's explore the unity of opposites through a story. It's based on true events, but it doesn't matter if a story is real or if it's fiction. The structure and rhythm is the same. This is the story of Friedrich and Willi, who were inseparable cousins in Germany, 10 and 8 at our story's beginning. They spent all day and every day together, and it never occurred to them that there could be life without each other. As the senior cousin, Friedrich, whose name means peaceful ruler, saw it as his duty to look after Willi. This was no easy task. The only other person they were closer to than each other was their beloved grandmother, their Oma, who mentored Friedrich in guiding Willi. Whenever the boys had a scuffle, she would sit them down and instruct Friedrich in front of Willi how to solve the battle and how to grow from it. Then she would make them chamomile cake, as chamomile is the peace bringer. Friedrich's life was defined by Willi. He was a bit crazy. This worried Oma to no end, and for good reason. Every now and then, Willi would fall out of a tree and break something. Friedrich saw himself as overly responsible and Willi as overly irresponsible, and as he grew older, he realized that he would have to save both Willi and Oma. To do that, Friedrich was going to have to become the guardian. His first task as a superhero was to build a fort, a place to corral Willi, and so he did so in the tree outside of Oma's front kitchen. Oh, they loved that fort. Those boys spent hours with Friedrich, sometimes reading stories, but more often Friedrich acted out the roles of the great heroes of German mythology. Sometimes he'd put on a little bit of costume or make a sword out of cardboard. Oh, how they wandered the world in a place of very dangerous, safe danger. Then their world radically changed when loose coils of barbed wire started appearing on city streets and in villages in 1961. This is a picture of a woman who has just handed her son over to his father. We don't know if she ever got back across that wire in time after having returned to get her elderly parents. Before the wall went up, the kids could come and go from Oma's house through her back door. But the wall sealed that door to the west, just a few feet away from Friedrich's house. And on August 13th, 1961, Friedrich crossed the alley from grandmother's back door to his house for the last time. The wall then divided their village. It also divided their farm. For the next 30 years, the only way that Friedrich and Willie could communicate directly was across a vast distance on their farm as they waved to one another across that iron curtain. Every morning they would get up, first walk to the fence, and wave to one another. But it was too far for them to be able to speak or to hear each other. Grandmother began planting chamomile seeds on her side of the wall, and on Sunday she would climb a ladder and throw seeds over onto Friedrich's side, hoping that somehow he would find them and be able to plant them, or that they would take root, and with chamomile growing on both sides, surely the wall would find peace and collapse its division. There was one other way that Friedrich and Willie managed to communicate. That was through my brother, who on very rare occasions secured special permission in his role as a lawyer to cross from the west into the east. That, what I call an ugly little dark car, would be my brother's. Of course, little sisters get to say things like that. It's quite a collector's car now. My brother carried a few treasures in that car, some sugar, some excellent coffee, a bit of chocolate, and ever and always letters of love from Friedrich to Oma and Willie. In return, brother ferried back letters from Oma and Willie about who had just been born and who had gotten married. And for a little while, always brother brought back a big, big piece of chamomile cake to Friedrich. Friedrich worried incessantly that something was going to happen to Oma without him being there to get her medicine, to take her what she needed. And it was difficult for him to get such things across the border. Eventually, of course, she passed away. And when she did, Friedrich left the farm and went to study in the city. He became a college teacher. Willie became a master craftsman, immersing himself in the art of the old world German woodworking. But that's all they really knew of each other, so they had to do what we all do when we've lost contact with someone we love or once loved. We create a narrative in our mind. Willie imagined that Friedrich lived a bourgeois life with beautiful ladies coming to visit him and perhaps a French maid cleaning his house. And of course, he would be driving a beautiful German car, or maybe a chauffeur would be driving it for him. Friedrich imagined that Willie was living a very meager life, farming with outdated equipment, always trying to keep some kind of parts together, struggling to bring the crops in. Then, on the night of November 9th, 1989, the East German guards at the Brandenburg Gate stepped back from their duties and let the Easterners walk through the opening. At first they moved very casually, as though the whole scene was not real. Just the night before, having done that would have gotten them shot. So they just stuck their hands in their pocket and whistled easily, stepping through the opening. When Friedrich and my brother heard about the opening, they raced to the wall and scrambled to the top of it. And there they waited and waited, but no sign of Willie. In his frustration, Friedrich did what many other Germans did in that moment. He took whatever tool he could get his hands on and vented his frustration, his anger, his hurt at that wall. Before long, crowds began surging through the opening, and then the long-awaited moment arrived. After 30 years, Willie walked through the gate, and the cousins collapsed sobbing into each other's arms. They held each other for a very long time before finally letting go and looking each other in the eye. Friedrich smiled and he said, "I have my car. I can drive you around the city, and I can show you my apartment." Willie was confused that Friedrich was driving a cheap East German Trabant that could be bought for pocket change and living in a very downtrodden apartment. What Willie didn't know was that Friedrich had fallen into a terrible depression early in his adulthood. He could never get tenure at the university and never manage to teach more than 1 or 2 classes a semester, so he always lived on the ragged edge of poverty. He drank heavily. Willie accepted his offer to stay a night or 2 in his apartment. He returned to the farmhouse in the east and began to build his woodcrafting company. He discovered very soon that the West Germans eagerly wanted these old world craftsmen. There had been too much building with low-cost foreign building materials, and they were interested in returning to the elegant craftsmanship of the old days. And before long, he had a company with 40 employees and had made some pretty big money. It just didn't disappoint Willie that Friedrich was struggling to make it, but it also sort of made him angry that his cousin had all this opportunity and squandered it. He was embarrassed that Friedrich was driving a cheap Trabant, an Easty car, but at least he was drowning his sorrow in excellent German beer, although there is no other kind of beer in Germany. Willie, having fallen in love with capitalism and the luxury of life in the West, in turn frustrated Friedrich, who was a bit stunned at Willie's lust for excess. All this time he saw himself as feeling guilty for living in the West, but now Willie becomes the embodiment of the West in the worst way, that is, in Friedrich's eyes. Willie then tries to take care of Friedrich by hiring to work in his business. But this is humiliating for Friedrich to be the subordinate to Willie. They had a terrible falling out and completely stopped talking to each other for years. It goes to show you that if a government doesn't build a wall dividing families, well, we'll make our own. In those arguments, though, they saw the fuller picture of each other, who they really were in the moment. The narrative they had created about each other before vaporized. And that is a perfect example of the unity of opposites brought to us by Heraclitus some 2,500 years ago. Heraclitus said that it is conflict that lets us see into the truer, deeper nature of someone. He told us that everything, including ideas, exists on a continuum of opposition to itself. In stories, the anti-hero is a symbol of the opposite of the hero, the opposite which resides within the hero. Heraclitus tells us that we can't know something until we know its opposite. So, for example, black and white. We can't know black without white. If all we have is black, we see nothing. If all we have is white, we see nothing. But when they come together, form comes into being. This is a picture of the last tree on Mount Hood before the landscape gives way to desolation. The unity of opposites in a story forms with a single word. The defining adjective for Friedrich in this story is responsible. The antonym for the antagonist means that the defining adjective for Willie will be the exact opposite, irresponsible. You find the adjective of the hero, the defining adjective. You take its opposite and now you have your anti-hero. And if they are not well balanced, the story will not be well balanced. In the movie The Miracle Worker, based on the play of the same name by William Gibson, we see the story of Helen Keller. She comes into this story as wildly undisciplined, and she meets Annie, her teacher, who is exactly the opposite, completely disciplined. In the movie It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey is honest. That gives us the antagonist, Mr. Potter, who is most definitely dishonest. This opposition, Heraclitus tells us, causes movement, and that everything in existence moves. This is a picture, artist's rendition of the Earth 600 million years ago when all of the continents were together. They have since moved due to the opposition of the forces of heat and gravity. Not only does the unity of opposites cause movement, but it directs where that movement will go. And the direction of the movement is always into its opposite. Everything moves into its opposite in time. The young become the old. The high-minded young person becomes the stuffy parent that they don't want to become. You remember that moment when you said, "Oh my, I just became my mother." The Earth here this is a picture of the Earth 4.5 billion years ago. It was a fiery molten mass of hot lava, and now it's a cool, solid core. Now, some people will say, well, the water's not solid, but it's resting on a solid crust. Friedrich had a midlife crisis at 40 that Willie was just walking into when he came through the wall. Friedrich took a radical turn into irresponsibility. He quit his job, and to the embarrassment of everybody, he didn't buy a convertible. He couldn't afford it. He started taking acting classes and going into the Kneipe bar at night and talking about his dreams of being an actor. Irresponsible Willie became the responsible owner of an important company with 40 employees. They became each other. And that is the movement of every story. It's also the movement of life. We will become the opposite of that which we judge. Of course, all the ancient philosophical and sacred texts tell us this. The movement of any story is the movement of a character from their defining adjective into its opposite. So here we see Helen Keller, a screaming wreck, and now a calm and loving child. Now we see George Bailey. How can we think of him as dishonest? He's such a happy and perfect guy. But he in fact becomes very dishonest because he's going to cheat the insurance company out of life insurance by killing himself, which is also a ratty thing to do to his family. If you haven't seen the movie Beasts of the Southern Wild, it's a beautiful movie. You should see it. I highly recommend it. In this story, we see a 6-year-old girl named Hush Puppy who moves from being completely powerless to commanding the great beast of the Southern Wild. Relationships cannot grow without conflict. Conflict is as vital to life as food is vital to our life, as oxygen is vital to our life. It is through conflict that we break through the facade we project and let our true self show. You cannot maintain a facade in the heat of battle. And when you've had an argument with someone, you have seen their deeper self and they have seen yours. And if the relationship can survive it, it will absolutely deepen. Deep, abiding love comes from argument after argument, in the careful relocation and readjustment and truth seeing, truth finding of each other. And this is because nothing is what it appears to be. This is a picture of a piece of metal. It's called ytterbium. It's a silver chunk of metal that we use to make lasers with. But that's not what's really there. If you pick this up and hold it in your hand, that's what you'll see. But if you look at it through an electron microscope, what you're going to see is a swirling mass of light, of energy. If you look through a spectrograph, you'll see the light turned into light waves. Conflict is our electron microscope. It is the human electron microscope. It lets us see deeper than just the surface. Here's a picture of Amanda Priestley, the character in The Devil Wears Prada. Oh, how sophisticated she begins the story, and she becomes so plain in the end. The movement of opposites into each other creates something new. So Heraclitus says, everything exists in relation to its opposite. That opposition causes movement. The movement is towards its opposite. And when they clash, we see a deeper side of someone, of something. But something new is also created. So out of heat and cold comes thunder and lightning. And here's a picture of lightning striking the Acropolis in Athens. And I taught close by. This was right out my window. Conflict is the basis of all life. The first form of life attacked the second form of life to take its energy and create something new. Conflict is the basis of all life. We have to get past this idea of thinking we need to avoid conflict or that there's something wrong with conflict. What we need is to engage conflict in a very healthy way. And stories show us how to do that. Every living entity in our world, every form with DNA, descends from Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Here's Luca. Meet your ancestor. Luca formed about 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, and it's been a fist fight ever since. There would be no us without conflict, no love without war. It would be a very different world for us if we could understand that conflict is a normal and healthy and absolutely vital part of human life. Rather than run from it, we need to embrace it with wisdom, seeking the evolution, seeking the new form of life that lies on the other side of it. And stories teach us exactly how to do that. You will be changed as a writer when you openly move into conflict with your characters. Now, this is a completely different conversation, the one specifically on how to move into it. Right now, we're talking about the movement itself and not the mechanism of going along that path. But let's take a moment to look at the conflict between Friedrich and Willie, knowing that something beautiful will lie on the other side of it. Willie's reputation with his excellent woodworking got him a contract with the State Theater in building sets for the classical German plays. And while he was there, he was talking to some theater people about his cousin, who, it was embarrassed to admit, is 40 years old, a drunk in a Kneipe bar, and dreaming about being an actor. Then he started remembering about how Friedrich would role play these great heroes from German mythology, and how deeply he seemed to love doing so. And Willie began to rethink. Maybe Friedrich was never really so much a guardian as he was an entertainer. So he asked if he might be a possibility that his cousin could get a bit part, like maybe just a walk-on role. And indeed, Friedrich got a walk-on role as a letter carrier in a play. No speaking lines, but he was on stage, and it was the greatest moment of his life. He could have died right there and been completely satisfied, even though he only got a few marks for the role. But something else happened. That one walk-on role led to another, that led to him getting one line in a play, that led to many lines, that eventually led to a leading role. And Friedrich found his life course and achieved his life dream of being an actor. And that did help repair the relationship between Friedrich and Willie. It was never like it was when they were kids, but now they had a connection that at least Willie enjoyed visiting him at the Kneipe bar for a beer with Friedrich's fans. The transcendental truth about conflict, the beauty of the unity of opposites, is finding the glory of something new through the furnace, the fire of conflict. Within every villain is a compassionate human being that seeks help, and the great weakness of many writers is their fear of embracing the villain in the villain's fullness. With compassion, every writer needs to understand what it would take for that writer to be that horrible villain, because none of us are free of being any other human being on this planet under the right circumstances. And this is the lesson that we teach the wider world through our stories. How to move through conflict and how to find that new transcendent thing on the other side, which grants a new perspective of the world, a desperately needed one in our time. Rilke said to us, perhaps everything terrifying is at bottom the helplessness that seeks our help. And that's what every story asks you to reveal. And that brings us to the workshop hour of our conference event here today. So I want to start talking with you about what's going on in the stories you are working with. And do you have an adjective in mind, or do you need some help finding the adjective that is within your mind that brought this story to begin with? So there's two handouts. One is a handout on the unity of opposites, and the other is a quick start guide for getting your story going if you're not sure how to get it rolling, or if you've written, no matter how much you've written and things seem to lag, it might help revive that. Before going on, let me tell you a little more about the universal grammar of story. I've written 3 books on it. One is the Universal Grammar of Story, the main book. This is the only place where the entire theory is collected into one volume. That is being replaced by a 6-volume series, of which the first volume is just being finished. The second book is a workbook to help you apply those ideas in the main book. And the third book is a game book. And this can either be a really seriously hard mental game like 3-dimensional chess, or you can do something radically silly and just roll the dice and let your story be written for you by the fates. What usually happens is you'll have a story you're working on, maybe you've gotten stuck, and you're going to play the game to see how you can get unstuck. And the game will direct you to create a character or a sequence of events that you do not like at all, and you're going to go, no, that's not how it goes. It goes like this, and then you tell it and you're unstuck suddenly. There is also a YouTube channel, Universal Grammar of Story on YouTube. And there you'll find audiobook chapters from this emerging first volume of the 6-volume set. You'll also find other videos such as on creativity and some interviews, radio interviews, and other presentations. All you have to do is look for @Universal Grammar of Story on YouTube, but you can also go to my webpage. You'll find me at hazeldenhart.com. You can also find some videos on YouTube with just searching for Hazel Denhart. They're the same ones on Universal Grammar, but Universal Grammar of Story YouTube is more focused on writing and story development. So I always like to close my presentations with this. No matter how elusive the story might feel, and no matter how long it might take you to capture it, you don't need to ask yourself, am I really a writer? Because you are. If you crave to write, you're a writer. If you've sworn off writing time and time again and find yourself back with a pencil in your hand or keyboard under your fingers typing out a story that you swore you've given up on, well, you're a writer. I've been teaching this for 30 years, and I've never met a non-writer who said, can I call myself a writer? Am I really a writer? Non-writers don't suffer the way writers do. A non-writer will hire a writer to suffer for them, and they'll go on about their business. So if you crave to write, you are a writer, and you are a writer for life, so claim it. And no matter how old you are or how long you've been at it, you don't get out of it. Writing is a lifelong calling. Nature has given writers as the natural philosophers of any society. We are the philosophical guides. We are the cultural scouts leading society along an uncharted and dangerous frontier. But we don't know that in our era. We don't realize that we are the philosophers. And let's say you're 70 and you haven't published anything yet, and so you've always dreamed of being a writer and you're too embarrassed to say you're still at it. No excuse for not claiming your position in society. I love the story of Harriet Dorr. At 72 years old, she published her first novel, Stones for Ibarra, and she won the National Book Award. Now, probably since she was 28 or 30, she's been yearning to write something but hasn't come out of the closet yet. If you're 90 or 95 or 99, you still have an obligation to tell stories to the best of your ability. Don't let society push you into giving up. This is your destiny. And we don't do it for money or fame. That's what society wants us to want. We do it because when we are lost in the I was going to say tantrum. When we are lost in the trance of writing, sometimes it's a tantrum. When we're lost in the trance, it is a sheer and absolute joy. There are moments when the writing is so good. There's no high on earth as high as that. That's what you're writing for. And it is your reward and reassurance for doing what you came into this world to do. So do that. So, teacher tells you you are a writer. And on the side here, teacher just loves you. Now, bye-bye, y'all.